Welcome back to Cygoth. My name is Courtney, and today we're looking at smoking versus vaping. Full disclosure, I vape and sometimes smoke. I do not condone the consumption of nicotine in any way, shape, or form. Trust me, your body and your wallet will thank you for it. I've been a heavy nicotine user for the last 13 years, and as an obese 30-something-year-old, it's starting to catch up with me. I wanted to look at this topic because the ban on e-cigarettes and vapes in Australia has just totally failed. It's as easy as going to the deli and seeing what they have under the counter. However, studies are starting to emerge showing that teens and young adults that have never smoked before are starting to take up vaping. This is obviously very concerning because there's very little evidence on how these non-smoking vapors are being affected, which begs the question. Just how different are cigarettes to vapes? Is one safer than the other? What kind of risks are being posed here? Let's start with what they both have in common. Nicotine. Nicotine, as noted by Raj Tiwari et al. In 2012, is considered as addictive as some words I can't say on YouTube. So why is nicotine even legal? Why are smokes and other nicotinic products still available? I mean, I have my theories, but they're not backed by research. We're not here for conspiracy rants. We're here for science. When inhaled, nicotine is carried by smoke particles through the trachea and bronchi into the alveoli of the lungs. Alveoli are the centers of a process called gas exchange, which is how we inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. Exposure to harsh smoke and vapors can break down these sacs and make it harder for gas exchange to occur. It travels to the brain and binds with specialized molecules called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Kinda looks like nachos, so I'm gonna call them nachos. They are found on the surface of the brain tissue, and when nicotine binds to it, it begins a cascade of chemical reactions underneath. The end result is speeding up brain function and the increase of the levels of the feel-good chemicals. Dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, endorphins, and more. Fuck yeah, feels good. With continual exposure to nicotine, more of the nachos develop and you become more tolerant. In other words, you need more to have the same effect. A chronic user may continue to ingest nicotine throughout their day to avoid withdrawals and keep those nacho molecules happy and fed so they can feel the feel good rush that comes with it. But Courtney, I hear you ask, that sounds great. Why is it so bad? Starving the receptors causes a molecule called corticotropin releasing factor to be released. When bound to its partner receptor, it can leave the user feeling agitated, feeling more stressed, anxious, and other negative outcomes. Fun fact, this also occurs in the withdrawal process of those words I can't say. In fact, in a 2009 paper, Neil Benowitz goes as far as saying that the withdrawal symptoms from nicotine are so strong, it is comparable to being a psychiatric patient. So if you or someone you know is trying to quit, which, good on you, I'm so proud of you, the best thing to do is to not hang around any smoking, vaping, any nicotine products, except for cessation products. We'll talk about those later. And if you're a smoker or a vapor, and knows someone is trying to quit, don't be an asshole. Don't do it around them because it is scientifically shown that it's just as difficult as giving up. Moth. And anyone in WA knows that shards hit hard. Now that we're more acquainted with nicotine, let's talk about the differences between smoking and vaping. In general, the practice of smoking is burning and inhaling the smoke of tobacco leaves. This practice was first adopted by Europeans in the late 15th century when invading Peru, and landed upon European shores when it was first introduced to the French court in 1560 and became the new fashion. Oh, oui, oui, c'est amusant. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. Little did they know what catastrophic harm this inconspicuous leaf would cause millions worldwide. There are 7,000 chemicals present in cigarette smoke, including formaldehyde, ammonia, radioactive elements, and diacetyl, most of which are either carcinogenic or are harmful to the body in one way or another. Naturally, we should be shitting ourselves at the prospect of developing cancers from 7,000 different chemicals, but people still smoke, people still vape. Why is that? Nicotine. Unfortunately, you don't even have to be smoking the cigarette to be harmed by it. The issue of passive smoking has been highly researched, and evidence suggests that passive smokers could develop the same conditions as an active smoker in the same capacity. Let's start at the very beginning, when the first associations between lung cancer and cigarette smoking were just being found. Sorry, this fucking lipstick is killing me. My research took me as far back as the early 50s, when Sir Richard Dole and Austin Bradford Hill discovered the startling truth we have come to recognize today. They demonstrated that the risk of lung cancer was related to the number of cigarettes smoked per day. That is, the risk was 25 times higher in those who smoked more than 25 cigarettes, as opposed to non-smokers. Presented with the findings, the head of the British Medical Research Council, Sir Harold Himsworth, implored them to investigate this further in other English cities. Eager to spread the word, they published their journal article in the widely known British medical journals in 1950, hopefully before the Americans. In 1957, a study group was formed between the American Cancer Society, American Heart Association, National Cancer Institute, and the National Heart Institute. This joint venture sought to take as much research as they could to make their conclusions based on the entire evidence base. They examined at least 16 studies conducted in 5 countries over an 18-year period. That is a huge literature base for the 50s in a brand new field no one had explored. Remember, this is a time where everybody smoked. Adverts of their health benefits would be promoted by cigarette companies and doctors alike. Of course, all of this came to the same conclusion, that there is indeed a statistical link between lung cancer and cigarette smoking. Since then, we have developed a better understanding of exactly how cooked smoking is. The process of developing cancer from cigarette smoke is as follows. There are over 70 different carcinogens in a single cigarette directly inhaled into the lungs. I'll make a separate video on how cancer develops. If you want to see that, hit like and subscribe. The short version is that dicking around with the DNA can cause mutations that lead to tumorigenesis, the creation of a cancer mass. The best known example of smoking-related cancer is, of course, lung cancer, but it can also cause 15 other different types of cancer, which occur by the same process. That is, the carcinogens can go to random cells, fuck them up, the cell becomes cancerous. It can happen to any of the 37 trillion cells in our body. Consequently, it sort of impairs your body's ability to get fresh oxygen, and you need your brain to be well oxygenated to avoid brain death and brain rot, I suppose. The future is looking good though. We're seeing reduced rates of smoking, either people quitting or people just not taking up in the first place, which is great. In my opinion, it's probably due to tobacco-related legislation. There's less places for people to smoke. And oh my god, those taxes. Fuck. In a publication from the US earlier this year, Farhad Islami et al. Estimated that between 1970 and 2022, 3.9 million lives were protected from reduced smoking rates, and a whopping 76 million years were added back to people's lives. Of course, age, race, sex, they all play different parts in the occurrence of cancer, but we're just talking on a general level here. Julia Branderis et al. Posted this study in 2024, in which they proposed a hypothetical tobacco-free generation. This hypothetical generation would have been born between January 1st, 2006 and December 31st, 2010. This generation wouldn't be able to buy ciggies, lol, sorry. However, cancer isn't the only disease associated with tobacco smoking. It also increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, diabetes, stroke, and other conditions. So we're all well aware that smoking causes cancer, it's bad for our lungs. We've known this for decades. But what about vaping? Since being introduced in the mid-2000s, vaping has become a more popular way of consuming nicotine. Vapes work by heating an internal coil which creates the vapor. Some commonly found ingredients in vapes include water, vegetable glycerols, formaldehyde, heavy metals such as cadmium, lead, and cannibal corpse. And of course something we touched on before, Diacetyl. There's a couple of reasons that I think make vaping appealing. It's a cheeky way to get a nicotine hit in a no smoking zone. There's also thousands of flavors, and some also use it as a method of quitting cigarette smoking. Whatever a vapor's reason, it's mistakenly thought to be less risky than smoking cigarettes. Maybe they don't have the same chemicals. They do. They taste better and smell better. Call me old school and maladapted, but cigarette smoke has a special place in my cold, dead heart. Statistics on cigarette and vape usage between 2001 and 2022/2023 was published by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. The report showed that vape usage had shot up from 0.5% in 2016 to 3.5% in 2022/2023. It's important to note that this increase goes hand in hand with the drastically reduced rates of cigarette smoking, going from 12% in 2016 to 8.3% in 2022 and 2023. In 2019, Kieran Kennedy et al. Looked at the results of 38 different studies. They state that the lack of inclusion of never smokers makes it difficult to apply these conditions to never smoked vapors, a relatively new population to arise in recent times. In 2020, Albert Osai et al. Conducted a study in the incidence of COPD in vapors. They found that 60% of vapors were under the age of 25. You're probably wondering if there is a difference between vaping on its own or vaping while smoking. Holy shit. Huge difference. Let's get into it. You know how I kind of spoiled this part of the video at the beginning? Maybe they don't have the same chemicals. They do. I wasn't kidding. Some studies have found that some vape liquids actually contain the same carcinogenic materials as cigarette smoke and can lead to coronary artery disease and high blood pressure. Also, many studies have come to the same conclusion that some of the conditions caused by cigarette smoking are also caused by vapes. You know what's even worse? There's not just second-hand exposure, there is also third-hand exposure. 2 studies found detectable concentrations of nicotine in both cigarette smokers' homes and vapors' homes. Admittedly, the nicotine levels in the vapors' homes were lower, but it was still a detectable level and considered an exposure risk. Now let's talk about the one highly publicized thing about vapes. Popcorn lung, also known as bronchiolitis obliterans. Now the reason it's called popcorn lung is because this condition was first observed in the lungs of popcorn factory workers. So what's popcorn factory crap got to do with vapes? Diacetyl, which can cause irreversible inflammation of the bronchi, and in some cases one or both lungs need to be transplanted. Joseph Allen et al. In 2015 examined the levels of diacetyl in different vape liquids, 51 flavors across 9 brands. The study found a huge variation in diacetyl levels across the 9 different brands and flavors, some as low as 0.3 micrograms up to 239 micrograms. So we can conclude that there's no consistency between the levels of diacetyl. And I'm starting to notice a trend of things not being regulated or consistent between anything to do with vapes. I mean, unless you take your vape into a laboratory where they can examine the ingredients in it and the concentrations, you just don't know what you're getting. In my humble opinion, even though nobody asked me, I think if vapes were to make a comeback into the country, they should be regulated and have warning labels just like cigarettes. Now this is where it gets really fucked. What happens if you do both? Well, given what we know now about cigarettes and vapes, you can conclude that it's worse. But how much worse? Much worse. Combining the presence of carcinogenic substances from 2 different sources increases the risk of cancer by 4-fold as compared to just smoking. In a 2024 paper by M.A. Bertoni et al., they mentioned 2 studies that revealed that smoking vapors were at a higher risk of developing COPD as opposed to just smokers. I mean, it really shouldn't be surprising that if you put both bad things together, it's going to make things worse. worse. Another 2024 study by Stanton Glatz et al. Examined 107 different studies that all led to the same conclusion, that smoking vapors had higher risks of CVD, stroke, metabolic dysfunction, asthma, oral diseases, and COPD, as compared to just smokers. I mean, in my personal experience, I used to smoke and then I vaped and smoked, and I found that going to uni while smoking and vaping, I had a lot of shortness of breath as opposed to just smoking. And now it makes sense. Hopefully some of this has been alarming to you, whether you're a smoker, vapor, both or neither. Thank God for NRT. By now, you really should be blindsided by all of this information, especially if you use nicotine. There are several methods of NRT available. These are the following methods of nicotine replacement available in supermarkets and pharmacies: patches, spray, gum, lozenges, and inhalators. These different methods allow nicotine to be absorbed by the body in a slow, controlled manner at controlled doses. There's also different strengths of NRT. You can get 2, 4, 8, I'm not 100% sure, but my guess is that these cater to people of different smoking levels. A 20-a-day smoker isn't going to need what a 40-a-day smoker needs. So it's enough to feed the receptors, the nacho receptors, and prevent the withdrawal pathway, but not enough to send out the feel-good chemicals. I'll briefly summarize the myths and facts as presented by Zva et al. In their 2006 publication. Most of these myths are related to nicotine causing disease, when in reality it only causes the addiction. There's also the argument that NRT can cause addiction, which is just not the case. It is safe to use if your cardiovascular disease is stable and monitored by your GP. There are concerns about pregnant/breastfeeding women and under 18 using these products, but taking NRT in a regulated dose is far safer in more ways than one when compared to inhaling cigarette smoke. As always, this is not medical advice, so please check with your GP or pharmacist before using them. Zva sums it up perfectly. Using nicotine replacement therapy to quit is always safer than continuing to smoke. Another method may be the use of prescription drugs called bupropion or Zyban and varenicline or Champix. The Therapeutic Goods Administration, the Australian version of the FDA, has approved both of these drugs for use in smoking cessation. Bupropion is called a norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor, or an NDRI. Try saying that 5 times fast. Meaning that it prevents the brain cell next to it from getting those particular feel-goods. It also binds to the nacho receptor, tells nicotine to get wrecked, thus preventing it from binding and starting the chemical cascade. Sort of like, you can't take without you got kidneys. Varenicline works slightly differently. It partially blocks the nacho receptor, essentially cock-blocking the nicotine molecule. The receptor likes varenicline better anyway. She shows more leg. After binding, varenicline stimulates the receptor to do a mini nicotine and produce a smaller hit of the feel-goods. The big difference between the two is that you can smoke while taking varenicline, but not while taking bupropion. I've tried varenicline before, and personally it worked great. Every time I looked at a cigarette, let alone dragged on one, I wanted to vomit. Shame I lost the packet while I was moving and never bothered to get knots scraped. Again, this is not medical advice, so please speak to your GP before trying prescription drugs. Finally, there's a really novel idea that was briefly researched. Nicotine vaccines. In essence, the vaccine could theoretically create an immune response to target nicotine conjugates, i.e. binding to a bigger molecule so it can be recognized, because nicotine is too small on its own. Kind of like seeing a baby in a crowd. You're not going to see it, but if mummy's holding it, then maybe you'd be able to see it. So it prevents it from entering the brain because it's too dummy thick, and no brain entry means no happy chemical release. However, from my research, there have been no new developments since 2013. However, if I do see any come about, I will definitely make an update because this shit is cool. In conclusion, smoking is cooked, vaping is cooked, doing both is double cooked, and it turns out they're just as bad as each other. Both vapes and cigarettes contain the highly addictive substance nicotine and a butt ton of carcinogens. Consequently, they can cause cancer in multiple areas of the body, as well as COPD, atherosclerosis, strokes, I forget the rest, but you know there's heaps. It might be satisfying AF in the moment, but what are you doing to yourself? What am I doing to myself? Researching this personally has been a little bit confronting. I get a lot of relief out of nicotine. I've been smoking since I was 19, and it really is the hardest thing to give up. I've tried cold turkey multiple times. I've tried NRT, but I just keep going back. So if you're watching this and you're thinking about vaping or smoking, just don't do it. Don't do it. I need to have a very long life ahead of me to outlive my enemies and spite them. And I hope you do too. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching my very first YouTube video. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Check the description box for my reference list and my socials. No, seriously, give me the validation. I've looked up so much, I've done so much research. Also, before I go, I realized there's a little bit of inconsistency in terms of lighting and filming and that. This is my first video, as I've said. So I'm still learning the ropes. I do have a new microphone coming, and maybe at some point in the future I'll update my camera. You know, all I've got is a webcam and it's just gonna have to do for now. So once again, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video. Bye friends!